rang at precisely 5 a.m., slicing through the quiet like a scalpel. I woke instantly, the way you do when you already know something is wrong. After 43 years as a nurse, 30 of those in critical care, I had trained myself to snap awake at the first ring. Even 6 years into retirement, that reflex had never left me. I reached for the receiver, heart already bracing. "Mrs. Tanner," the voice said, calm but laced with the kind of subdued sympathy I had once delivered countless times myself. "This is Dr. Prescott from Anaheim Memorial Hospital." I clenched the phone tighter. Kenneth. He had gone night fishing with his old friends Walter and Fred. They planned to stay at the lake all night. Something had happened. "What happened to my husband?" I asked, surprised at the steadiness in my own voice. "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Tanner. Your husband was brought in around 3 o'clock this morning with a severe heart attack. We did everything we could, but..." I closed my eyes. I knew what came next. How many times had I rehearsed those very words at the bedsides of grieving families? "We weren't able to save him," the doctor finished after a pause. "My condolences." "Thank you," I said quietly, asking a few brief, necessary questions: when I could come, what paperwork was needed, and then I hung up. I sat still on the edge of the bed, staring at the half that now would always remain empty. Kenneth never liked early mornings, especially on weekends. I was usually the one to wake first, slipping out to make breakfast. The smell of fresh coffee was the only thing that could coax him out from under the covers. But now, there would be no more sleepy smiles, no more groggy kisses from the man who had shared my life for nearly half a century. Mechanically, I stood, pulled on my robe, and went into the kitchen. I filled the kettle and placed it on the stove. The normalcy of the routine grounded me. As long as my hands had something to do, I could delay the flood of grief waiting just beyond the edge of my awareness. Kenneth had been complaining of chest pains for months. I begged him to go in for a full examination. He brushed me off each time, saying it was just the spicy food, just age catching up. "I'm 69, Murray, not 90. Don't bury me before my time," he joked the last time I brought it up. The words echoed now with cruel irony. The kettle whistled. I turned off the stove and made myself a strong cup of tea. Still, I didn't cry. Years in intensive care had taught me how to compartmentalize grief. Feel it later. For now, there were things to do, important things. Call the children, notify the funeral home, find the insurance documents. It was 6 a.m. Iris would be awake. She was always an early riser, usually up checking her students' schoolwork before breakfast. Gareth, on the other hand, had never been a morning person, not even as a child. But this couldn't wait. I dialed Iris's number first. She answered almost immediately. "Mom? Is something wrong?" "Your father died last night," I said simply. No preamble, no softening. "What?" A breath, a stifled sob. "Oh my God, Mom. Are you okay?" "I'm managing. There's a lot to organize. Can you come today?" "Of course. We'll leave in an hour. Troy and Winslow are coming too. Darren will meet us after work. Mom, I'm so sorry." "I know, sweetheart. I have to call Gareth." "Do you want me to call him?" "No, I have to do it." I ended the call, took another sip of tea, and dialed my son's number. The phone rang longer than I liked. Just as I was about to hang up, Gareth's sleepy voice answered. "Hello? Gareth, it's Mom." "Mom, what's wrong? It's 6:20 in the morning." "Your father died last night, a heart attack." There was a long silence. "What? How did it happen?" I told him what Iris already knew, that Kenneth had collapsed while fishing, that Walter and Fred had driven him to the hospital, but it was too late. "The funeral will be Monday," I said. "You need to come as soon as you can. Iris is already on her way." Another pause. Gareth cleared his throat. "Mom, this is terrible, of course, but it's Sheridan's birthday on Monday. We've been planning a party for months. I can't cancel everything." I froze, cup halfway to my lips. "What did you say?" "We've booked a restaurant, invited 50 people. Maybe we could move the funeral to Tuesday?" I I set the cup down slowly, carefully, to keep from spilling. You want me to move your father's funeral because of your wife's birthday? Mom, you have to understand. This is important to her, to both of us. I just can't cancel it all at the last minute. We've spent so much money. Your father is dead, Gareth. My voice was ice. Your father, who raised you, who paid for your college, who helped you buy your house. He's dead. And you're telling me you can't come to his funeral because of a party? It's not just a party, Gareth snapped, irritation creeping in. It's my wife's birthday. That matters. I closed my eyes and saw myself in the hospital room 36 years ago, holding Gareth for the first time. I saw Kenneth crying tears of joy, saw the sleepless nights we endured when Gareth was sick. I remembered Kenneth teaching him how to ride a bike, fix a car, fish at that same lake. Today is my wife's birthday, Gareth repeated. I heard you the first time, I said quietly. Give Sheridan my best wishes. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were trembling, but not from grief, from fury. Our relationship with Gareth had always been difficult. He had begun pulling away as a teenager, rebelling and resisting every attempt at guidance. Kenneth believed it was just a phase. Let him run wild, Mary. All boys go through this. But Gareth's distance only widened over the years. After college in San Diego, he came home less and less. When he met Sheridan, the visits became nearly non-existent. I remembered the first time I met her. Polished, ambitious, sharply intelligent, she made no effort to hide her disdain. Too simple, I once overheard her say on the phone. His mother's a nurse, his father fixes cars, they've never even been to Europe. Kenneth had laughed it off. She'll grow out of it. She didn't. And in time, Gareth became as ashamed of us as she was. The phone calls dwindled. Holidays became the only time we saw him, if that. Kenneth never stopped hoping. He's our boy, Murray. No matter what, he's our boy. But I had known better. Now, Kenneth was gone, and our son couldn't be bothered to come to the funeral because of a birthday. I stood and walked to the window. The sun had begun its slow climb above the Anaheim horizon, streaking the sky with soft pink and gold. Our little house, nestled among others just like it, had stood for decades. We bought it 35 years ago when Iris was 7, Gareth was 3. Scrimped and saved until we paid off the mortgage early. Kenneth had built a treehouse in the backyard. Iris adored it. Gareth did too, until adolescence made such things embarrassing. We thought about downsizing after the kids moved out, but Kenneth always said, "Let's stay. The children need a place to come home to." He dreamed of grandchildren filling the halls one day. That dream came true, at least partially. Iris gave us Troy, now 15, serious, thoughtful, passionate about programming, and Winslow, 8, full of mischief and bright curiosity. He had Kenneth's eyes. They visited often. Gareth and Sheridan had no children. Careers first, Sheridan said. Maybe later? But later never came. I turned away from the window. There were still calls to make. To the funeral home, to relatives, to friends. The day stretched before me, heavy and long. That afternoon, when the logistics had been handled and the numbness had begun to settle in, I wandered into the living room and sat down in Kenneth's chair. His old leather recliner, worn smooth the arms, still bore the shape of his body. I had never sat in it before. It had been his place, but now I sank into it, seeking some faint residue of his presence. The phone rang again. I looked at the caller ID. Gareth. I hesitated, then picked it up. "Mom," he said without greeting me. "I've been thinking, maybe I could come by for an hour or two Monday morning, just to, say goodbye to Dad, before I start getting ready for the party." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "The funeral is at 2 o'clock, Gareth," I said in an even voice. "But don't worry. I'm sure your father would have understood that Sheridan's birthday is more important." "Mom, don't start," he replied, his voice already tinged with irritation. "I'm trying to find a compromise." "A compromise?" I repeated, and I felt something crack deep inside me, something brittle that had been holding on too long. "Your father is dead, Gareth. This isn't a situation for compromise. Either you come to say goodbye or you don't. You're making a mountain out of a molehill, he exclaimed, defensive now. Dad would have understood. He was always more reasonable than you. Those words struck harder than he could have known. Kenneth had always been softer on Gareth, constantly making excuses for his behavior. He just hasn't found himself yet, Murray, he used to say when Gareth quit yet another job or skipped another family gathering. Give him time. Your father loved you unconditionally, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Even when you disappointed him over and over again, he never stopped believing that one day you would grow up, become a man who could be relied upon, a man who understands what family means. Obviously, he was wrong. There was a pause. Then Gareth's voice turned colder. You know what? I'm calling you, trying to find a solution, and you're attacking me with accusations. If that's how you feel, maybe I shouldn't come at all. That's your choice, Gareth. It always has been, and it always will be. I hung up before he could reply and sat there, the phone still in my hand, my fingers clenched around it. Something in me had shifted during that conversation, like a string stretched tighter and tighter over the years had finally snapped. A small, irreversible break. The front door opened a moment later. I heard soft voices in the hallway, then light, hurried footsteps. Winslow ran into the room and flung herself into my arms. Grandma, she whispered. Mom said Grandpa died. Is it true? She clambered onto my lap, her little arms wrapping around my neck. I hugged her close, burying my face in her hair, inhaling the scent of apple-scented shampoo. My throat tightened. Yes, sweetie, it's true. Is he in heaven now? She asked, her big eyes searching my face, eyes that reminded me so much of Kenneth's. I think so, I said softly. I wasn't sure about the afterlife myself, not in any concrete way, but it felt like the right thing to say to a child trying to understand something so big. Iris and Troy entered the room. My daughter looked pale and worn, her eyes red from crying. Troy, tall for 15, stood solemn and quiet, but his lower lip quivered. Mom, Iris said, crossing the room to hug me gently so as not to disturb Winslow. How are you holding up? I'm managing, I replied. I'm glad you're here. Did Gareth call? I nodded, not wanting to share the details of that phone call in front of the children, but Iris saw the answer in my face. He's not coming, is he? She asked quietly. It's Sheridan's birthday on Monday, I said. They were planning a big party. Iris shook her head but said nothing. She stood up, quietly offering to make tea for everyone. Troy came closer and awkwardly laid his hand on my shoulder. I'm so sorry, Grandma, he said, his voice serious and steady. Grandpa was the best. I placed my hand over his and gave a slight nod. Yes, he was. And he was very proud of you. That was true. Kenneth adored his grandson, especially after Troy had taken an interest in mechanics. The two of them often spent weekends in the garage, tinkering with the old car Kenneth was restoring. It had become their shared project. Now that car would remain unfinished, like so many other things Kenneth had left behind. Later that evening, after the children had gone to sleep in the room that had always been theirs at their grandparents' house, Iris and I sat in the kitchen with glasses of wine. A quiet settled between us, heavy and still. I can't believe he's gone, Iris said eventually, staring off toward nothing. Dad always seemed so constant, like he'd always be here. I nodded, unable to find words. Even now I couldn't quite accept that Kenneth wasn't coming home. No more walking through the door with that familiar bang, tossing his keys on the hall table and kissing me on the cheek with his usual cheerful, "Hi, Murray." What about Gareth? Iris asked after a while. Do you really think he won't come to the funeral? He made it clear that Sheridan's birthday is more important, I said, a trace of bitterness in my voice. Iris shook her head slowly. Sometimes I just don't understand him. How can he treat his own family like that? I took a sip of wine. I had been asking myself the same question all day. How had our son grown into a man who could prioritize a child's birthday party over saying goodbye to his father? Where had we gone wrong? You know, I said quietly, turning to look at my daughter. Your father always said that one day Gareth would understand what family means, that he'd grow up and realize. Iris watched me, waiting. He believed it until the day he died, I continued. Did you? She asked. I shook my head. I hoped he was right. But today I realized something. Some people just don't change, and there are consequences for every choice we make. Monday morning dawned unexpectedly bright. I stood by the bedroom window, staring out at the clear sky. It didn't seem fair. On the day of Kenneth's funeral, the weather should have matched my mood. Gray, cold, and cruel. It should have rained. Instead, sunlight poured across Anaheim as if the world had no time for grief. Mom? Iris peeked into the room. Are you almost ready? Darren says it's time to go. I nodded and ran my hands down the front of my perfectly pressed black dress. I had bought it 3 years ago for my sister's funeral. I had hoped not to wear it again so soon. Yes, I'm coming, I said, turning to take one last look in the mirror. The woman staring back at me seemed older than the one I knew, older than even a few days ago. Always fit and full of energy, I now looked worn down. The fine lines etched around my eyes had deepened, and the streaks of silver in my chestnut hair shimmered brighter than ever. I reached up and ran a hand through it. Kenneth had always loved to stroke my hair. I turned away. Downstairs, my family was waiting. Troy stood straight and serious in his dark suit, looking like a young man far beyond his years. Winslow wore a simple black dress with a white collar, her hair neatly braided. She held a small bouquet of wildflowers in her hands. I picked them for Grandpa this morning, she said, offering them to me. They're his favorites. I swallowed hard, crouched down, and wrapped her in a hug. They're beautiful, sweetie, I said softly. Your grandfather would have loved them. Darren stood at the door, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. He was never comfortable with overt displays of emotion, but he was a rock, steady and dependable for Iris and the children. I was grateful for that. Is everyone ready? He asked, checking his watch. Yes, I replied, rising to my feet. Let's go. In the car, I looked out the window at the streets of Anaheim, the city that had been the backdrop to our entire life together. Kenneth and I had built our family here. We had grown old here. Every block, every building held a memory. There was the supermarket where he did the Saturday shopping with his own meticulous list, the park where we walked hand in hand when the children were small, the gas station where he had first met Walter, his best friend. An accidental fender bender turned into 2 hours of conversation about fishing and the start of a friendship that would last 3 decades. It was with Walter that Kenneth had gone on his final fishing trip. The car slowed and I looked up. We were approaching the small Methodist church where Kenneth and I had been married 44 years ago. Back then, it had been filled with white lilies and blue ribbons. Today, a hearse stood at the entrance, and people in dark clothes slowly filtered inside. Darren parked the car, and we headed toward the church. At the entrance, we were met by Walter, gaunt and pale, dressed in a rumpled suit that was clearly too big for him. Muriel, he said, pulling me into an awkward hug like a man unaccustomed to showing emotion. I'm so sorry. If I had known, if I could have done something. You did everything you could, Walter, I replied softly, patting him on the shoulder. Kenneth spent his last evening doing what he loved, in the company of his best friend. Don't blame yourself. He nodded quickly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, before stepping aside to let us in. The church was half full. Kenneth had never been a particularly sociable man, but the few people he considered friends loved him dearly. His colleagues from the auto repair shop, where he had worked for almost 40 years, sat in a group dressed in black suits, looking unusually solemn. A few neighbors we had known for decades were there, along with some relatives, few in number, mostly from my side. Kenneth had only one younger sister, Lorraine, who now sat in the front row, hunched over with grief. I sat down beside her and Lorraine squeezed my hand with her thin fingers. "Where's Gareth?" she whispered, glancing around. I shook my head, unable to bring myself to say the truth, that my son had chosen his wife's birthday over his father's funeral. But I saw from Lorraine's expression that she understood. "Ken would have understood," she murmured after a pause, but her voice lacked conviction. The service began. I heard the priest speak about life, death, and resurrection, but his words went in one ear and out the other. Instead, I stared at the coffin, draped in bouquets of flowers, and found myself wondering what Gareth was doing at that very moment. Was he helping Sheridan decorate the house for the party? Was he greeting guests? Was he thinking about his father at all? When it was time for remembrances, I stood up first. My knees trembled, but my voice remained steady. "Kenneth Tanner was a good man," I began simply. "Not perfect, but good. He was a reliable husband, a loving father and grandfather, and a loyal friend. He didn't strive for great achievements or wealth. He just wanted those he loved to be happy and safe." I told them how we met, a young nurse and a shy mechanic whose car I had accidentally scratched in the hospital parking lot. How he asked me out for coffee instead of arguing about the repair. How we got married just 6 months later. "Because," Kenneth had said, "when you know it's right, why wait?" I recalled the memories of buying our first home, small, worn down, but ours. How Kenneth worked overtime so we could afford good schools for the children. How, no matter how exhausted he was after work, he always found time to go to school meetings or help with homework. "He wasn't perfect," I continued, scanning the faces before me. "We had difficult times. There were arguments and misunderstandings. There was a period when we almost lost each other. I didn't delve into the painful chapter of our lives 20 years ago when we had nearly divorced, when Kenneth moved out, when we attended therapy, and how, slowly and painfully, we rebuilt our relationship. That was private. Instead, I said simply, but we got through it together and we came out stronger. Kenneth taught me that true love isn't a magical feeling. It's a daily choice. The choice to be there, to support, to forgive." My eyes fell on the empty seat next to Iris, the one Gareth should have occupied. The choice to be there, the choice my son hadn't made. I finished my speech, and others followed. Walter, who through his tears managed a fond story about fishing. Kenneth's boss at the auto shop, who spoke of his professionalism and quiet integrity. Iris talked about what a caring and gentle father he had been. Even young Troy found the courage to say a few words about his grandfather, how he taught him to fix his bike and never got angry when something broke. After the service, we proceeded to the cemetery. I stood silently, watching as Kenneth's coffin was slowly lowered into the ground. I felt a strange numbness. There were no more tears. They had all been shed in the preceding days. Only emptiness remained, and the crushing realization that a part of my life, the most important part, was over forever. Winslow approached and took my hand. "Grandma," she asked softly, "will Grandpa be cold there?" I sat beside her and wrapped my arm around her small frame. "No, sweetie," I whispered. "Grandpa isn't really there. His body is, but he himself—" I faltered, uncertain how to explain death to an 8-year-old, especially when I wasn't sure of my own beliefs. "He's in a better place, and he's always in our hearts." Winslow nodded solemnly, as if the explanation made perfect sense, then gently placed her small bouquet of wildflowers on the fresh earth. After the cemetery, everyone came back to my house. Iris and Darren took charge of the guests while I sat in Kenneth's chair, accepting condolences and thanking people almost mechanically. I felt detached, as though I were watching it all from a distance, like an observer rather than a participant. "Where's Gareth?" I heard the question repeatedly, from a neighbor who remembered him as a child, from a former colleague of Kenneth's whose son had once been Gareth's best friend, from a distant relative who had last seen him 5 Christmases ago. "He had urgent business to attend to," I replied each time, avoiding the real answer. I didn't want to shame my son in front of others, even as I seethed inside with a quiet, burning anger. By evening, most guests had left. Only the closest family remained. Lorraine would be spending the night before heading back to San Diego. Iris and her family had decided to stay for the week, to help with arrangements and simply to be there for me. Once the children were in bed, the adults gathered in the kitchen. Darren opened a bottle of whiskey Kenneth had saved for special occasions and poured everyone a glass. "To Kenneth," he said, raising his glass. "To a good man." "To Kenneth," we echoed. I took a sip and felt the whiskey burn down my throat. Kenneth had loved ending his evenings with a glass of whiskey, sitting in the backyard and staring up at the stars. "The best way to end the day," he used to say. "I still can't believe Gareth didn't come," Lorraine murmured, swirling her drink. Ken was so proud of him. "It's Sheridan's birthday," I said flatly. "They're throwing a big party." Lorraine stared at me, her mouth hanging open. "You're joking," she said at last. "He missed his father's funeral for a birthday party?" I nodded, unable to speak. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I knew that woman was a bad influence, but this..." She trailed off. "It's not just Sheridan," Iris said with a weary sigh. "Gareth has always been complicated. She just exacerbated what was already there." I listened quietly as they talked about my son, my mind drifting back to the boy he had once been. The sweet child who used to bring me wildflowers from the neighbor's garden, even if it annoyed the neighbor. The sullen teenager who constantly clashed with Kenneth. The ambitious young man always chasing more. More money, more recognition, more success. I thought of our last serious conversation 3 years ago when Gareth came to ask us for money for a new business venture. Kenneth had wanted to help. "He's our son, Muriel. We have to support his dreams." But I had insisted on seeing a business plan. The plan was vague, the risks high, and the potential gains doubtful. When we declined, Gareth accused us of never believing in him. "We've always believed in you, Gareth," I had told him. "We just don't believe this project will work." He had stormed out and didn't speak to us for several months. "You okay, Murray?" Lorraine's voice broke through my thoughts. "You look tired." "I'm fine," I replied automatically. "Just a lot to do." "Take your time," Lorraine said gently, placing her hand over mine. "You have time." But I knew some things couldn't wait. Tomorrow, I would have to call Linwood Ellery, our family lawyer. Kenneth and I had drawn up a will 10 years ago, when he was first diagnosed with early-stage diabetes, and I had begun struggling with high blood pressure. It was a simple will. The house, savings, and investments were to be divided equally between the children, with lifetime use for the surviving spouse. The family cabin in the mountains, our little sanctuary bought 20 years ago, was designated for Gareth, who had always loved it more than Iris. But now, I knew I had to change those arrangements. Not out of spite, I wasn't a vengeful person, but because Gareth had made it clear that he didn't value family ties. He would probably just sell the cabin at the first opportunity. That place held too many memories to be discarded so easily. "I think I'd better get some sleep," I said, finishing my whiskey. "Tomorrow will be a busy day." Lorraine and Iris exchanged looks, but didn't protest. They helped me up and walked me to my bedroom, treating me as if I were fragile, though it was exhaustion rather than frailty. The bedroom remained untouched, just as it had been when Kenneth was alive. His slippers by the bed, his reading glasses resting on the nightstand, his old sweater carelessly draped over the chair in the corner. I hadn't been able to put any of it away. As long as those things remained, I could pretend, just for a little while longer, that he had simply stepped out and would be back soon. I crawled into bed, pulled the covers up to my chin and turned on my side, facing the empty space beside me. 44 years we had shared this bed. 44 years of whispered conversations before sleep, of quiet arguments and warm reconciliations, of making plans for a future we thought would last forever. 44 years of feeling the warmth of another body beside me. 44 years of listening to the rhythm of Kenneth's breathing as he drifted off to sleep. And now, only silence. Now there was only emptiness. I reached out and touched Kenneth's pillow. It still held his scent, a familiar mixture of aftershave and motor oil, which lingered stubbornly even after a shower. And something else, something indefinable that was simply Kenneth. In the still darkness, alone with only my thoughts and the quiet thrum of grief, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not loud sobs, just silent tears that rolled down my cheeks and soaked into the pillow. I mourned not only the loss of my husband, but also the painful reality of a son who had grown into someone so far removed from the values Kenneth and I had tried to instill in him. "You were right about a lot of things, Ken," I whispered into the silence. "But not about Gareth. He's not going to change, and I'm done pretending that he will." In the morning, I would call Linwood Ellery and make the necessary changes to the will. The cottage, our quiet retreat in the mountains, would go to Iris and her children. Gareth's share of the rest of the estate would be reduced to the legal minimum, nothing more. The remainder would be set aside for my grandchildren's education and future. This decision brought me no satisfaction, only a bitter kind of resolve. I would protect what remained of Kenneth's legacy, from a man who neither appreciated him in life nor honored him in death. With that conviction anchoring me, I finally drifted off to sleep, clutching Kenneth's pillow tightly, as if it might keep him close just a little while longer. Linwood Ellery's office was in a modest one-story building in downtown Anaheim, unremarkable on the outside but always immaculate inside. I had been here many times over the past 2 decades, when Kenneth and I were first drawing up our wills, when we executed powers of attorney for emergencies, and again after my sister's passing to settle her affairs. Each visit left me vaguely uneasy, a reminder of death's certainty and the quiet necessity of planning for what follows. But today, as I sat in the waiting room under the soft hum of overhead lights, I felt strangely calm. It had been 3 days since Kenneth's funeral. Iris and her family were still staying with me, offering comfort and presence, but I had insisted on going to the lawyer's office alone this morning. "Mrs. Tanner?" said a gentle voice. I looked up to see an elderly secretary with kind eyes and neatly pinned gray hair standing in the doorway. "Mr. Ellery is ready for you." I stood, adjusted the lapels of my dark blue suit jacket, and followed her into the office. Linwood Ellery rose from behind his polished oak desk, his expression warm and sincere. A trim man with a carefully groomed gray beard, he walked toward me with both hands extended. "Muriel," he greeted, clasping my hand. "Please accept my condolences. I would have attended the funeral, but I was in Boston visiting my daughter." "Thank you, Linwood," I replied, appreciating the sentiment. "I understand. We've known each other long enough that formalities aren't necessary." Though 5 years older than me, Linwood somehow looked younger than his 73 years. He had been friends with Kenneth ever since Kenneth repaired his aging Volvo 30 years ago, and from that day forward, he'd become our family lawyer. Reliable, steady, trusted. "Please, have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Tea? Coffee?" "No, thank you," I said as I sat and placed my handbag in my lap. "I'd like to get right to the point." He nodded, settling in across from me, his fingers folding neatly on the desk. "You want to change the will?" he said, not as a question but a confirmation. "Yes," I said firmly. Linwood didn't appear surprised. He reached into a drawer and withdrew a thick folder marked Tanner. "Before we begin," he said, flipping through the documents, "I have to ask, are you sure this is a decision you've thought through carefully? Are you certain it's not simply grief influencing you after Kenneth's passing?" I appreciated the question. Linwood wasn't just a lawyer. He was a friend who genuinely cared. "I've thought about this for 3 days," I replied with quiet clarity. "And yes, it's connected to Kenneth's death, of course, but it's not impulsive. Circumstances have changed, and I have to change my plans accordingly." He studied me for a long moment over the rim of his glasses, then gave a small nod. "All right, let's see," he said, opening the folder. "According to the current will, drawn up 10 years ago and updated 5 years ago, upon the death of one spouse, the surviving spouse receives full lifetime use of all property. After the surviving spouse passes, the estate is to be divided equally between your children, Iris and Gareth, with the exception of the mountain cottage, which goes solely to Gareth. Correct? Yes, I said. That's exactly what I want to change. Linwood pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and uncapped his pen. Tell me what you'd like the new distribution to be. I took a deep breath. Saying it aloud felt harder than I'd expected. I want to change how my estate is distributed after I'm gone, I began. First, the mountain cottage should go to Iris and her children, not Gareth. Linwood nodded as he scribbled notes. Second, I want the majority of my savings and investments to be distributed as follows. 50% should go into educational accounts for my grandchildren, Troy and Winslow, 25% each. This money is to be used solely for education and, after graduation, may be accessed for purchasing a home or starting a business, not before they turn 21. He continued writing, occasionally glancing up in acknowledgement. Then, 30% will go to Iris. I'll retain 10% for my own retirement and possible medical expenses. And Gareth, I hesitated. Gareth is to receive only the legal minimum necessary to prevent him from contesting the will. I also want to leave him some of Kenneth's personal effects. His old tool collection, the fishing gear, a few of his wristwatches. Items with sentimental value. Nothing more. When Linwood finished writing, he set the pen down and looked up. May I ask why you've decided to make these changes? His tone remained professional, but there was a note of understanding in his eyes. He knew something more must have driven this. I had anticipated the question. It was necessary, after all. He needed to document justification in case Gareth challenged the will later. Still, I didn't want to malign my son. Gareth didn't come to his father's funeral, I said, my voice flat with restrained emotion. He told me his wife's birthday party was more important. When I called to tell him Kenneth had passed, he said he couldn't cancel the party. He even suggested we postpone the funeral. Linwood blinked, a rare crack in his professional composure. I see, he said after a pause. That's an unusual decision on his part. It's not just that, I continued. Gareth's been growing more distant for years. He rarely visited. He barely spoke to Kenneth. 3 years ago, he asked us for money, for a business idea that had no grounding. When we refused, he accused us of never supporting him. I paused, then added, I don't want this to come across as revenge. It's not. This is about protecting what was important to Kenneth and me. We wanted our children to value family, to support each other. Iris understands that. She's been by my side every day, helping, bringing the kids to say goodbye to their grandfather. Gareth has made his priorities clear. Linwood tapped his pen thoughtfully against the paper. Do you think Kenneth would have agreed with this? The question caught me off guard. For a moment I hesitated, picturing my husband. His eyes, his steady hand, his quiet faith in our son. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe he would have given Gareth another chance. He believed always that Gareth would come around. But Kenneth is gone, and I have to make these decisions now. I understand, Linwood said gently. I'll prepare the new will according to your wishes, but let me offer this as a friend. Doors don't have to close forever. You can revise the will again, should circumstances change. I nodded, though in my heart I doubted anything about Gareth would ever change enough to warrant a revision. One more thing, Linwood said. Would you like Gareth to be notified of these changes now, or would you prefer he find out after your passing? I thought about it. A part of me wanted him to know, immediately, directly, to understand that actions have consequences. But another part, the mother part, still wanted to shield him from pain, even pain he'd earned. He should know, I said at last. He's a grown man. He needs to understand what his choices have cost him. In that case, Linwood said, I'll draft a formal letter to accompany the new will, and once it's signed and registered, I'll send it to him. That should take about a week. All right, I said quietly, a strange sense of release washing over me. The burden I'd carried for days seemed to lighten. We spent another hour going over the fine points, clarifying legal language, identifying specific assets, and confirming how everything should be distributed. Linwood explained every nuance with patient clarity. As I left his office that day, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only the steady calm of having done what needed to be done. For Kenneth, for our grandchildren, for the legacy we tried so hard to build together. While I tried to focus on the practical aspects and not let my emotions get the better of me, the weight of the moment was undeniable. When we were done, I felt exhausted but calm. The decision had been made, and deep down, I knew it was the right one. "I'll send you a draft of the will within 3 days," Linwood said as he walked me to the door. "Review it carefully. If you have any changes, let me know. Then we'll meet to sign it." "Thank you, Linwood," I said, shaking his hand. "For everything." "You're welcome," he replied, offering a gentle smile. "And Muriel, you are a strong woman. Kenneth always admired that about you." I felt the sting of tears welling in my eyes, but I blinked them back. "See you soon, Linwood." Leaving the lawyer's office, I climbed into my car but didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, staring at my hands on the steering wheel, hands now marked with protruding veins and age spots, hands that had once cradled newborn Gareth 36 years ago. I remembered how tiny he had been, with his red, wrinkled face and surprisingly strong grip, how he looked up at me with those dark eyes full of trust and love, how Kenneth had been afraid to even hold him first, his rough mechanic's hands trembling with the fear of harming something so fragile. What went wrong? When did we lose him? Was it a gradual shift, invisible day by day? Or was there a single turning point, a moment after which everything started to unravel? One memory surfaced: Gareth at 14. He wanted to go to a concert in a neighboring town with his friends. Kenneth and I had said no. It was too far, too late, and there'd be no adults present. Gareth had been furious, yelling that we controlled his life and didn't trust him. He stormed out and didn't come back until morning. Later, we found out he had gone to the concert anyway. Kenneth and I had disagreed on how to handle it. I wanted to ground him, cut his allowance, forbid him from seeing his friends. Kenneth said such harshness would only push Gareth further away. "He's growing up, Muriel. He needs space. We have to trust him." In the end, we compromised. Gareth was punished, but more leniently than I would have liked. Maybe that was a mistake. Maybe we should have drawn a firmer line. But now, there was no point in replaying those choices. What was done was done. Gareth had grown into the man he was, and no amount of soul-searching would change that. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. On the drive home, I thought about Iris and my grandchildren waiting there, about Troy, so much like Kenneth in his quiet strength, and about little Winslow, all boundless energy and curiosity. They were the future of this family. They were the ones who would carry Kenneth's legacy forward, the values, the memories, the love we'd tried so hard to instill. The cottage in the mountains, that sacred place where Kenneth had spent the best days of his life, should go to those who would cherish it, not to someone who saw it as an asset to be sold off in haste. As I turned onto our street, I saw Troy and Winslow playing in the yard. Winslow noticed me first. Her little face lit up as she waved wildly. I waved back, feeling my heart flood with warmth. I parked the car in the garage and walked into the house. Iris was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. "How did it go?" she asked without looking up. "Fine," I said, slipping off my coat. "Linwood will take care of everything within a week." She nodded, asking no more. Iris knew I had changed my will, but she didn't press for details, and for that, I was grateful. "I thought I'd make that vegetable pie your dad loved so much," she said. "Remember how he always asked for seconds?" I smiled, warmed by the memory and pierced by its absence. "I remember. He once said your pie was better than mine. He was just being polite." "No one cooked better than you," Iris laughed, turning to face me. I stepped forward and hugged her. She froze for a moment, then set the knife down and hugged me back. "Thank you for being here," I whispered. "Of course, Mom. Where else would I be?" Just then, Troy and Winslow burst into the house, breathless and excited. "Grandma!" Winslow ran to me, her hands cupped around something. Look what I found in the garden. She opened her palms to reveal a stone with a natural heart shape. It looks like a heart, see? She pointed eagerly. I think Grandpa sent it to us from heaven. I took the stone, still warm from her tiny hands, and turned it over. It's beautiful, I said. And yes, it really does look like a heart. Troy rolled his eyes, but I saw the faintest smile tug at his lips. You can keep it, Grandma, Winslow said solemnly, so you won't miss Grandpa so much. I clutched the stone tightly, feeling a lump rise in my throat. Thank you, sweetheart. I'll take very good care of it. And in that moment, I knew I had made the right decision. Iris's children, my grandchildren, were the living embodiment of everything Kenneth had dreamed of. They deserve not only the physical legacy, but the emotional one, too. Our family traditions, our love for nature, the stories of who we were. If ensuring that meant making a difficult choice, so be it. After all, as I'd said at the funeral, true love is a daily choice. Sometimes that choice hurts, but that doesn't make it wrong. I looked at the heart-shaped stone in my palm and whispered silently to Kenneth, I will protect what we created together. I will preserve it for those who truly appreciate it. That evening, after Iris and the children had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, thumbing through old photo albums. Gareth's life unfolded across the pages. His first day of school, Christmas mornings, fishing trips with Kenneth, his first catch, the pride on both their faces. Somewhere between those happy moments and today, the thread had frayed, but I couldn't find the moment it snapped. Was it college when Gareth first left home and began feeling embarrassed by his humble roots? Or was it when he met Sheridan, with her polished manners and ambitious pedigree, her parents both academics, living in a world far from ours? Or perhaps it wasn't one moment at all, but a series of tiny hurts and slights that eventually built a chasm too wide to cross. I closed the album. There was no sense tormenting myself with what-ifs. Whatever had happened, Gareth had made his choice, and I had made mine. Across town at that very moment, my son was just arriving home, unaware that the course of his life had shifted irreversibly. Gareth Tanner slammed his car door and whistled as he strolled up the driveway. It had been a good day. 2 deals closed, commissions secured. The money wouldn't solve everything, but it would buy him some breathing room. For now. He stopped at the mailbox and pulled out a stack of envelopes. Bills, ads, catalogs, standard fare. One envelope, however, stood out, plain white, bearing the logo of a law firm. Frowning, Gareth tore it open right there on the driveway. His eyes skimmed the heading, Ellery Partners. As he read, his confident expression began to crumble, first confusion, then disbelief, and finally, a dawning horror. Dear Mr. Tanner, we hereby notify you that your mother, Mrs. Muriel Tanner, has made significant changes to her will. As her solicitor, I'm obliged to inform you of the following. Under the new will, the family cottage in the mountains passes to your sister, Iris Parker, and her children. You are no longer a beneficiary of this property. Additionally, the distribution of the remaining estate has also been altered. You will receive the minimum share required by law, along with select personal belongings of your late father. Mrs. Tanner asked me to convey that this decision is due to your absence at your father's funeral and is final. If you have any legal questions, please contact me at the number provided. Sincerely, Linwood Ellery, attorney for Mrs. Muriel Tanner. Gareth read the letter again, slower this time. His hand trembled slightly. The cottage, his cottage, the one he had already sold in his mind, the asset that would wipe away a fraction of his ballooning debt, debts Sheridan didn't even know about, loans stacked on loans, credit cards opened in her name, secrets piled higher than the interest payments. No, he whispered, crushing the letter in his fist. She couldn't have done that. But she had. His mother, practical, calm, always composed, had cut him out. Over one event, one missed funeral. Yes, it had been his father's funeral, but hadn't he explained? Didn't she understand he couldn't cancel Sheridan's birthday? Not after all the money they'd spent? Almost $5,000? Money they didn't have? He walked into the house and tossed the rest of the mail onto the hallway table. Sheridan wouldn't be home until 6. He had time to think, to figure out how to break this news, if he even would. She didn't know about the plans to sell the cottage, or the debt, or the web of lies he'd spun just to stay afloat. No. Gareth had only one option left. He had talked to his mother. This had to be some kind of misunderstanding. She couldn't seriously be disinheriting him. His mother just wanted to scare him, to teach him a lesson. That was all. Gareth grabbed his phone and quickly dialed her number. The call rang endlessly, unanswered. He hung up and tried again, then again. After the 4th attempt, the automated voice finally responded. "The subscriber is temporarily unavailable." "Damn it," Gareth muttered, throwing the phone onto the sofa. He didn't have time for this. His next move was to call Iris. His sister answered after the 3rd ring. "Gareth?" she said, her voice tinged with surprise. "What's wrong?" "You know what happened," he snapped. "Don't pretend you don't know." There was a short silence on the other end. Then Iris's voice came through again, more measured this time. "Are you calling about Mom's will?" "Yes," he barked. "Damn it, the will? She left you the cottage. My cottage." "Gareth," Iris replied, her tone shifting colder. "It was never your cottage. It belonged to Mom and Dad. They always said it would be mine one day." But what?" he interrupted, though the answer already weighed on him like an anchor. "But you missed the funeral. And now she's decided to punish me for it. That's so childish. You really don't understand, do you?" Iris sighed. Her voice, no longer cold, now sounded tired. "It's not just about the funeral, though yes, that was the final straw. It's about how you've treated them these past few years. How rarely you visited. How you constantly belittled their choices. How you asked for money, then disappeared for months. You made them feel like obligations, Gareth, not like parents." "I was busy," he argued, running his hand through his hair as panic began to build in his chest. "I have my own life, my own family." "So do I," Iris replied firmly, "but I made time because I knew they wouldn't be around forever. And now Dad's gone, and you didn't even come to say goodbye." Gareth exhaled heavily, the realization pressing down on him like a crushing weight. "Look," he said, trying to sound more composed than he felt. "I know I screwed up, but it can be fixed. Talk to Mom. Convince her to change her mind, at least about the cottage. You don't need it, but I do." "Do you need it?" Iris asked sharply. "When was the last time you were even there?" He hesitated. 4 years ago, maybe 5. "You always said it was boring, that it was a hole in the middle of nowhere, and now suddenly it's essential?" "It's a matter of principle," he muttered, jaw clenched. He couldn't tell her the real reason. Not yet. "Mom has no right to punish me like this." "It's not punishment, Gareth. It's consequences. There's a difference." "Screw you," he growled and hung up, his hand trembling with frustration. He collapsed onto the sofa, his stomach churning with a toxic blend of fear and rage. He needed money. A lot of it. And fast. Otherwise, everything he had built, the facade, the carefully stacked house of cards, was going to collapse in spectacular fashion. There were 3 loans from different banks, more from colleagues and acquaintances, all borrowed under various pretenses. Secret purchases he'd hidden from Sheridan, gambling debts, and no way to repay any of it. The cottage was supposed to be his lifeline. Easily worth $500,000, maybe more. A wooden house tucked away in the mountains, on a sizable piece of land in a tourist area. Selling it would have cleared everything. A fresh start. No more lies, no more sleepless nights. And now it was gone. Ripped out from under him. All because of what? Because he missed a funeral? His pulse spiked again. Gareth snatched up his phone and redialed his mother's number. Still no answer. That was it. He'd go to her. He'd talk to her in person. She wouldn't refuse to speak to her own son. She couldn't. He was already grabbing his jacket when he heard a car pulling up in the driveway. Tires on gravel. Sheridan was home early. Gareth quickly stuffed the letter from the lawyer into his pocket and tried to compose himself, masking his panic behind a neutral expression. The front door opened and Sheridan stepped in, her heels clicking against the parquet. Tall and elegant as ever, with her blonde hair perfectly styled and her makeup flawless, even after a long day at the dental clinic. She glanced at him. "You're home already?" she asked, her tone curious. "I thought you had a client meeting until 6. "It got postponed," Gareth said, forcing a shrug. "What about you? Why are you home so early?" "My last patient canceled," she replied, setting her bag down. "Are you okay? You look tense." He hesitated. Telling her the truth would mean unraveling everything he'd hidden for years. The will, the debts, the plans for the cottage, the gambling, everything. But what was the point of hiding it now? The dam had already cracked. "I got a letter from my mother's lawyer," he said at last. "She changed her will. The cottage goes to Iris and her kids. I only get the minimum legal share, whatever that means." Sheridan's brows furrowed. "What? Why would she do that?" "Because of the funeral," Gareth answered flatly. "She's still angry I didn't come." "That's ridiculous," Sheridan huffed, throwing her bag onto the sofa. "It was my birthday. We'd planned that trip for months. What did she expect you to do? Cancel at the last minute? That's what I told her." He tried to keep his voice even. "And she disinherited you over that?" Sheridan shook her head, incredulous. "That's so petty, so childish." Her using the same words he had used with Iris stirred something in him, a vague irritation. Still, now wasn't the time to argue semantics. "I was going to go see her," he said. "Talk to her face to face. She can't just take my inheritance away like that. It's not fair." "Of course it's not fair," Sheridan said, removing her jacket and hanging it over the back of a chair. "But are you sure it's a good idea to see her now? You look like you're barely holding it together." "How am I supposed to look?" he snapped. "She just took a $500,000 property from me." Sheridan paused, her eyes narrowing. "500,000? She repeated. "How do you know how much it's worth?" Gareth froze. He had said too much. "I just guessed," he muttered, turning away. "Real estate prices are rising, especially out there." "Gareth." Sheridan's voice dropped, slow and sharp like a knife. "You're not telling me everything." He knew that tone, knew what it meant. Sheridan didn't let things go. Once she started digging, she'd keep at it until she uncovered every last secret. And right now, Gareth didn't have the strength to play games. "I owe money," he said quietly, avoiding her eyes. "A lot of money." "How much?" "About 400,000. The room fell into a deafening silence. The ticking of the wall clock was suddenly thunderous. Then Sheridan made a strange sound, a laugh, half choked and tinged with disbelief. "Please tell me that's a joke." "I wish it were," Gareth murmured. "It just built up. First one loan, then another. And then I needed more to cover those. It spiraled." "Wait," she interrupted, raising a hand. "You took out loans without telling me?" He nodded slowly. "At first, it was just small amounts. Then it got out of control. I was going to use the cottage to pay it off." Sheridan stared at him as if she were looking at a stranger. "The cottage that doesn't even belong to you?" "It was going to be mine," Gareth snapped. "It would have been, if Mom hadn't decided to punish me." "And what did you think would happen when your parents realized you sold the family cottage the moment you got it?" Sheridan asked, incredulous. "I thought, by then they wouldn't find out." Sheridan covered her face with both hands. "My God," she whispered. "You were hoping they'd die so you could sell the cottage without anyone asking questions?" "No, I mean, not exactly. I didn't want them to die, I just..." He trailed off, realizing how monstrous he sounded. "Listen," he added quickly, "that's not the point right now. What matters is we're in serious trouble. No, Gareth." Sheridan lowered her hands, her eyes glassy with tears. "It's not we. It's you. You took out the loans. You planned to sell the cottage. You lied to me for years. I didn't want to worry you." "Worried?" Sheridan let out a laugh that cracked under pressure. "You owe $400,000. That's not worried, that's financial ruin. How could you hide this from me? He didn't know how to answer. How could he explain that it had all started with good intentions, trying to give her the life she was used to? Fancy dinners, designer clothes, Hawaiian vacations, the life her parents had provided. But then came the gambling. First, a solution, then an addiction. "I'm sorry," he said at last. "I screwed up, but we can fix this. If I talk to Mom, explain everything." "You're going to tell your mother that you secretly took out $400,000 in loans and planned to pay them off by selling the family cottage?" Sheridan's voice trembled. "That will only confirm everything she thinks about you." The words hit him harder than she realized. "What do you mean?" Gareth asked, his voice low. "She always thought you were irresponsible," Sheridan said with quiet finality. "She thought you didn't value your family, that you were selfish, and now I'm starting to think she was right." Gareth's blood boiled. Shame and fear twisted inside him, and rage offered the easiest escape. "So now you're on her side?" he growled. "After everything she said about you, how she judged you all these years?" "She never looked down on me, Gareth," Sheridan said softly. "You just assumed she did." Gareth sat in silence, letting the weight of his mother's words sink in. Rain continued tapping steadily against the kitchen windows, like the world itself was holding its breath. The mention of Uncle Ralph sent a chill through him. He remembered fragments, a loud laugh, an infectious energy that filled a room, and then, suddenly, nothing. Just silence, disappearance, shame spoken in hushed tones. The story Gareth had been too young to understand at the time now rang loud and clear. His mother's warning wasn't just a condition. It was a line drawn in love and fear. "I remember him," Gareth murmured, staring into his tea. "I didn't know how bad it was." Muriel nodded slowly. "Most of us didn't, until it was too late. That's why I'm setting these terms now, Gareth. I can't watch you become a shadow of yourself. I won't let your father's memory be stained by that." A lump formed in his throat, too large to swallow. "I never wanted this," he whispered. "I didn't wake up one day and decide to ruin everything." "I believe you," Muriel said gently. "But believing you isn't enough anymore. I need to see change, real change, and it starts with honesty. Are you willing to accept the help I'm offering?" He nodded. "Yes," he said, though his voice trembled. "I'll do it. I'll go to therapy. I'll send the receipts. Just please don't give up on me." Muriel reached out across the table, placing her hand over his. Her fingers were thin, cool, but steady. "I never gave up on you, Gareth. Not really. I just needed to protect what your father and I worked for. And I needed to protect your sister, too." Gareth's eyes dropped again, guilt carving deeper into his chest. "I haven't been fair to Iris. I always thought she had it easier than me, but maybe I just didn't see her struggles." "She's not perfect," Muriel said, pulling her hand back, "but she's always been consistent. That's more than I can say for you. And yet, here we are. You've come home, Gareth. That's something." He managed a faint smile. "Does this mean I can come by sometimes? I mean, not for money, just maybe to help around the house? Fix that porch railing Dad always meant to take care of?" Muriel gave a soft laugh. "We'll see. Let's not rush ahead. One day at a time, all right?" "One day at a time," Gareth repeated, as though tasting the words for the first time. Outside, the rain began to ease, softening into a drizzle that veiled the street in mist. The conversation lingered in the air long after it ended, each word echoing through the quiet house as mother and son sat together in a fragile peace. They spoke a little more about practical matters, deadlines, creditor names, and payment plans, but the heart of the conversation had already happened. The rest was scaffolding. By noon, Gareth stood at the doorway again, this time with a small list of things to do and a clearer sense of what came next. Muriel handed him a folded envelope. "A check," she said. Not for spending. It's for your largest creditor, the one charging over 20% interest. Go pay it today. I'll call the others later and negotiate payment terms. Thank you, he said, accepting it like it was made of glass. Remember, Gareth, Muriel said as he turned to go, if you lie again, even once, this ends. Do you understand me? I do, he said with a solemn nod. And don't come back here unless you're ready to keep being honest. Not just with me, with yourself. I will. He stepped off the porch and walked to his car, the envelope gripped tightly in his hand. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt a faint glimmer of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Direction. Not peace, not redemption, but motion. A faint push towards something more grounded than the fantasy he'd been chasing. He didn't drive home immediately. Instead, he found himself pulling up to a small public park nearby. The sky was still overcast, but the clouds had thinned enough to let in some light. He sat on a bench near the walking trail, watching as an older man jogged slowly past, and a mother pushed her toddler on a swing. His phone buzzed beside him on the bench. It was a message from Sheridan. Just 4 words. I'm staying at Mom's. He didn't respond right away. He stared at the screen, feeling a familiar panic start to rise. But then something inside him calmed it. She needed time. She deserved time. And maybe space was the best gift he could give her now, instead of the clinging apologies that used to buy him temporary forgiveness. He typed a message and reread it 3 times before sending, I understand. I'm getting help. When you're ready, I'd like to talk again. He put the phone face down and leaned back on the bench. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't a reunion. But it was a start. 2 weeks passed. Gareth kept his appointments. Every Tuesday and Friday, he sat across from a woman named Dr. Helms, whose calm demeanor and sharp questions forced him to confront things he'd buried under excuses and bravado. They didn't talk about debt right away. They talked about identity, about self-worth, about a boy who once wanted to make his father proud but never figured out how, about the man who confused admiration with love and performance with purpose. Muriel stayed true to her word. She paid off 3 of his most dangerous creditors, and Gareth mailed in receipts for every therapy session. He didn't ask her for more. Instead, he got a second job, late shifts at a warehouse stocking shelves. It wasn't glamorous, and it left him sore and tired, but he welcomed the exhaustion. It was honest. Sheridan stayed away. She sent a few messages, updates, questions about the mail, brief exchanges, but nothing personal, nothing hopeful. Gareth didn't press. He knew this was her time to decide what she wanted, now that the illusion of their perfect life had been stripped away. Then, one quiet Saturday morning, Gareth opened the door to find Iris standing on the porch. She held a brown paper bag in her arms. I brought muffins, she said, holding it out like a peace offering. He stepped aside and let her in. They sat in the living room and ate in silence for a while, the awkwardness between them crackling like static. Finally, Iris looked at him and said, Mom told me everything. Not the details, but enough. Gareth swallowed a bite, unsure how to respond. I was angry, she continued. I still am, honestly, but I also remember what it felt like when Uncle Ralph disappeared, and I don't want to have another ghost in this family. Gareth nodded slowly. I'm trying, Iris. I know. That's why I'm here. They sat for another hour, talking in halting bursts. Not about forgiveness, at least not yet, but about rebuilding, about the cottage and their childhood, about Dad. When Iris left, she hugged him. It wasn't warm, not quite, but it was real. A month later, Sheridan returned. She didn't say she was moving back. She didn't say much at all. Just stood in the doorway of their apartment, suitcase in hand, and looked at him with tired, uncertain eyes. I'm not making any promises, she said. I'm not asking for any, Gareth replied. She stepped inside. For the first time in a long time, they sat down together with no pretense. Just two people trying to understand if anything could be salvaged, whether the man who had lied to her could become someone she could trust again, whether the woman he had disappointed could ever believe in him once more. Outside, the world turned slowly, like the tide returning after a storm. Gareth knew there was no erasing the past, no sudden fix. But he also knew something his old self had never believed. That rock bottom isn't the end. It's the first solid ground you stand on when you finally decide to climb. His father rarely spoke of Gareth's mistakes, and when he did, it was with such quiet sorrow that Gareth had learned never to press for details. That silence had become a wall between them, made heavier by everything left unsaid. So when Muriel laid down her final condition, Gareth simply nodded. "Okay," he agreed. "I'll see a psychologist." "And one more thing," Muriel added, her voice still calm but edged with something immovable. "You must be honest, with me and with Sheridan. No more secrets, no more lies. If you're in trouble, financial or otherwise, you tell us. Don't try to fix everything yourself and make it worse." Gareth nodded again, this time more slowly. Oddly, he felt a weight lifting from his chest. The conditions weren't cruel. They were firm, yes, but they were also fair. More than that, they offered him a way out of the mess he had created. "Thank you, Mom," he said, voice unsteady. "I don't know how I deserve your help after everything I've done." "You're my son, Gareth," Muriel said, her tone unflinching. "No matter what happens, that doesn't change. I may be disappointed in your choices. I may not like what you've done, but I will never stop loving you." The words struck him with more force than he expected. They weren't wrapped in sentiment or dramatics. They were simply true, and that truth broke through him. His throat tightened. Tears blurred his vision. "Dad, he would have said the same thing, wouldn't he?" he asked hoarsely. Muriel nodded gently. "Yes. Though, he might have been softer about the conditions. He was always gentler with you." Her voice faltered just for a moment. "And I took that for granted." Gareth stared at the floor, guilt tightening his chest. "I thought his love and support would always be there, like the sun coming up. I thought it would just always be there. And now he's gone," Muriel said, finishing the thought he couldn't bring himself to complete. "And you don't get to tell him how sorry you are, how much you appreciated everything he did. That's a hard lesson, Gareth. But maybe it's the one you needed most." He nodded silently, unable to speak through the lump in his throat. For a long time they sat without words, the only sound the soft drumming of rain on the roof above them. The silence wasn't cold or tense anymore. It was something else, shared, reflective, fragile. "You know," Muriel said at last, breaking the quiet, "your father's old car, the one he was restoring, is still in the garage. He never finished it." Gareth looked up. "The '67 Ford Mustang?" Muriel smiled faintly. "Yes, he worked on it for years, said he wanted it finished by his 70th birthday. His plan was for you and Troy to take it out together. A 3-generation Tanner road trip." Gareth inhaled sharply. He hadn't known. He hadn't realized his father was still imagining a future that included him, despite everything. A future with Troy, him, and Kenneth, together. "I can't finish it," Muriel said quietly. "I don't know the first thing about cars. Iris doesn't either. And Troy's still too young." She didn't need to say anything else. Her eyes, calm and expectant, were already asking the question. Gareth heard it as clearly as if she'd spoken aloud. "You want me to finish the car?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "If you want to," she replied with a shrug that wasn't indifferent. "Your father taught you almost everything he knew about mechanics. It'd be a way to honor his memory. Maybe to build something back." He didn't answer right away. Restoring a car wasn't a simple task. It would take time, weeks, maybe months. It would mean coming here regularly. It would mean teaching Troy what his father once taught him. It would mean reconnecting. But more than that, it wasn't just a car. It was a bridge. a link to the man he'd lost and to the child he'd drifted away from. "I'll do it," he said finally. "Not just for you, not even just for Dad, for me, for Troy." Muriel nodded, and for the first time in years, Gareth saw a flicker of something in her eyes he had missed terribly. Pride. Quiet, cautious, but real. "Good," she said. "You can start this weekend. Troy usually comes over on Saturday mornings." "Does he know?" Gareth asked, hesitant. "About me missing the funeral? About the will?" "He knows you weren't there," she replied, "but not about the will. That's not his burden. Not yet." Gareth nodded, a soft gratitude settling in his chest. Despite everything, she hadn't poisoned Troy's view of him. "And Sheridan?" Muriel asked suddenly. "What are you going to do about your marriage?" He sighed deeply, knowing there was no easy answer. "I don't know. It depends on her. If she's willing to give me another chance, I'll do everything I can to be better, to be honest, responsible. But if she doesn't..." He trailed off, shrugging. "Then I'll have to accept it and move on." Muriel didn't look away. "Has your attitude toward her changed? After all this?" Gareth thought for a long time. He had always admired Sheridan, her strength, her intelligence, her self-possession. But was it love? Or was it dependence? Desperately trying to prove he was worthy of her? "I don't know," he admitted. "I always believed she was the best thing that ever happened to me, that I didn't deserve her, so I tried to fabricate success, get into debt, just so she'd be proud, so she wouldn't leave me for someone better. And now, I realize that's not love. That's fear." He paused. "If love is based on fear of losing someone or the need to impress, it's not really love. It's dependence." Muriel nodded thoughtfully, as though he had just voiced her own long-held thoughts. "Your father and I didn't always have it easy," she said. "You were about 16 when we almost split up. He moved out for a while. You probably don't remember much." He did remember. A strange, heavy silence in the house. His mother tense, his father absent. But as a teenager, he had been lost in his own world. "We made it through," Muriel continued, "because we had respect, not a fairy tale, not blind devotion, just two flawed people choosing to stay partners, even when it got hard." Gareth stared down at his hands. Maybe he had always idolized their marriage, believed in an illusion of perfection he could never replicate, so he hadn't even tried. "What would you have done?" he asked suddenly. "In my place? With Sheridan?" Muriel turned the empty coffee cup slowly in her hands. "I'd be honest. First with myself, then with her. I'd ask myself if I really loved this man, not the idea of him, and if I felt he loved me in the same way. If both answers were yes, I'd fight for it. If not, I'd let it go." Gareth nodded. The simplicity of her words struck deep. It wasn't dramatic. It was clear, practical, real. "Thank you, Mom," he said, "for everything, for not turning your back on me." "I never will," she replied. "But I won't carry you either. I'll help you up when you fall, but the walking, you have to do that on your own." He smiled. That was his mother. Blunt, loving, never sentimental, and he wouldn't have her any other way. They talked for hours, about the past, the future, Kenneth, Sheridan, Iris, Winslow, and especially about Troy. There were still many questions left unanswered, but something in their relationship had shifted. The wall Gareth had built brick by brick over the years was starting to crumble. When he finally left, the rain had stopped. Soft beams of sunlight pierced through the clouds, gilding the front porch. Muriel walked him to the door. "Come on Saturday," she said. "Troy will be glad to see you. He always asks about his Uncle Gareth." "Really?" Gareth looked at her in surprise. "Even after I missed the funeral?" Muriel shrugged. "Children forgive faster than we do, and sometimes they're wiser. Troy said maybe you were just too afraid to say goodbye to your father, that maybe you loved him too much to face it." Gareth swallowed hard. The lump returned to his throat. Maybe, just maybe, his nephew saw through to something he couldn't admit even to himself. "I'll come," he said. 9 in the morning, as usual. As usual, Muriel nodded. Hope, cautious but present, flashed in her eyes. "See you soon, son." "See you soon, Mom," Gareth replied. He stepped off the porch, turned back once. She was still standing there, hand raised in a quiet farewell. He raised his in return. A simple gesture, but it held more than goodbye. It was a promise of future visits, future conversations, maybe even a new beginning. The drive home felt shorter somehow. As he drove, Gareth thought about the conversation waiting with Sheridan. He still didn't know what he'd say, how to explain the turmoil inside him, the guilt, the hope. He didn't know how it would end, but for the first time in years, he felt ready to face it, ready to speak honestly, to stop running. And on Saturday, he had a meeting with a boy named Troy and an old Ford Mustang in a dusty garage. A project Kenneth Tanner never had time to finish. Now, it had become something more, a thread connecting 3 generations of Tanners. Perhaps by rebuilding that car, Gareth could rebuild what had fallen apart in his family. Trust, respect, love. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The beginning of a long, painful, but necessary process of healing. Not only his relationships with his mother, his wife, and himself, but also his memory of his father, the man he hadn't been brave enough to say goodbye to, but whose legacy he was now learning to carry. The will remained unchanged. The cottage had gone to Iris and her children. Gareth had received only a modest portion. But Kenneth Tanner's true legacy had never been about property. It was in the quiet lessons of responsibility, of loyalty, of love without condition, lessons Gareth was only now beginning to truly understand.